Welcome. I'm Erik Fleming, host of A Moment with Erik Fleming, the podcast of our time. I want to personally thank you for listening to the podcast. If you like what you're hearing, then I need you to do a few things. First, I need subscribers. I'm on Patreon at patreon.com/A Moment with Erik Fleming. Your subscription allows an independent podcaster like me the freedom to speak truth to power and to expand and improve the show. Second, leave a 5-star review for the podcast on the streaming service you listen to it. That will help the podcast tremendously. Third, go to the website, momenterik.com. There you can subscribe to the podcast, leave reviews and comments, listen to past episodes, and even learn a little bit about your host. Lastly, don't keep this a secret like it's your own personal guilty pleasure. Tell someone else about the podcast. Encourage others to listen to the podcast and share the podcast on your social media platforms because it is time to make this moment a movement. Thanks in advance for supporting the podcast of our time. I hope you enjoyed this episode as well.
The following program is hosted by the NBG Podcast Network.
Hello, and welcome to another moment with Erik Fleming. I am your host, Erik Fleming. And so today is a special kind of day. Well, episode, I should say, because I have a number of guests. So it's a jam-packed show, but a couple of the guests have been on before. One is a very frequent guest on the show, and he has written a new book. So we're going to talk about that. And then the other repeat guest is a young lady who is very, very dynamic. And I believe I want to emphasize one of the most important people in the discussion, especially when it comes to issues dealing with women in America. She's devoted a lot of her time and her career in researching issues that impact women and trying to come up with action plans to make a difference in their lives. And so I'm glad to have both of those repeat guests. And again, I stress following the rule. So once you've been on, you have an open invitation to come back. You don't even have to wait for me to ask you. You can just say, hey. And so you hear me say that a lot, but I really mean that. And these two guests are proof that that is the case. And then I have the other guest is somebody that I've been pursuing to be on the podcast for a while. And we finally were able to make that happen. And so I was so glad to get this young lady on because she is very, very insightful about the political process. And with all of my guests, the time that I've allotted to have these conversations is not enough. I'm already pushing the limits and having these multiple guests and how long the podcasts go. But I think you all are getting something out of it. That's why you keep listening and the word is spreading. I'm finding out even more so. So that's good. But this young lady, she's very, very impressive. And hopefully you can pick that up in our discussion. Still looking for folks to subscribe as always. So you can go to patreon.com/A Moment Erik Fleming, do that. Or you can go to momenterik.com and go to the website and not only subscribe, but learn a little bit more about the podcast, especially if this is your first time listening to it. Yeah, so this is going to be a great show. Matter of fact, I think that's why I'm just going to title it. Instead of trying to, because all of them are coming at different angles in the discussion. Just going to call this a great show. Again, I'm not an expert at titles, and you've done as many episodes as I've had. You know that it gets challenging to try to do something that's not repetitive. So this will be the last time I'll be able to use this bailout title, but that's what we're going to call this episode, a great show. And I hope that you agree that it lives up to it with the guests that we have on. And another reason why the show is great is because of Grace G. She has been, what's the term I want to use? Invaluable as far as her dependency and her professionalism. And I hope that y'all are getting something every time that she's doing these news spots. You know, it has really been a good addition to the podcast. And I pray that we can continue to keep this thing going. So without any further ado, it's time for a moment of news with Grace G.
Thanks, Erik. Millions of people of all ages took part in peaceful No Kings rallies across the United States on October 18th to protest President Trump's authoritarian agenda. NBA Hall of Famer Chauncey Billups and Miami Heat guard Terry Rozier were among more than 30 people charged in two related federal gambling investigations. North Carolina's legislature passed a new congressional map designed to gain an additional Republican seat in the U.S. House, furthering a national mid-decade redistricting push by Republicans. President Trump commuted the prison sentence of former U.S. Representative George Santos. President Trump's lawyers are seeking $230 million from the Justice Department for legal costs in his federal investigations. A U.S. appeals court ruled that President Trump can deploy National Guard troops into Portland, Oregon. A federal judge in Chicago mandated that federal law enforcement officers involved in immigration enforcement must wear and activate body cameras during interactions with the public. The state of Arizona sued the U.S. House of Representatives over the delayed swearing-in of Representative-elect Adelita Grijalva. Former FBI Director James Comey, citing constitutional violations, asked a federal judge to dismiss criminal charges against him. The Trump administration announced it will freeze an additional $11 billion worth of infrastructure projects in Democratic-led states. A New York jury convicted one former correctional officer of murder in the fatal beating of inmate Robert Brooks, but acquitted two others. A Georgia man with an assault rifle and ammunition was arrested at Atlanta's main airport after his family tipped off police that he was planning to shoot up the terminal. And OpenAI has blocked users from generating videos of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with its new Sora app after disrespectful depictions of the civil rights leader surfaced online. I am Grace G, and this has been a Moment of News.
All right. Thank you, Grace, for that moment of news. And now it's time for my guest, Dr. C. Nicole Mason. As one of the nation's foremost intersectional researchers and scholars, Dr. C. Nicole Mason brings a fresh perspective and a wealth of experience to the creation of Future Forward Women, a bold new initiative to build women's power and influence in the United States. For the past 2 decades, Dr. Mason has spearheaded research on issues relating to economic security, pay equity, poverty, women's issues, and entitlement reforms, policy formation and political participation among women and communities of color, and racial equity. Dr. Mason was the executive director of the Women of Color Policy Network at New York University's Robert F. Wagner's Graduate School of Public Service, the nation's only research and policy center focused on women of color at a nationally ranked school of public administration. She is also an inaugural Ascend Fellow at the Aspen Institute in Washington, D.C. At the start of the pandemic, she coined the term she-cession to describe the disproportionate impact of employment and income losses on women. Dr. Mason is the author of Born Bright, a young girl's journey from nothing to something in America, and has written hundreds of articles on women, poverty, and economic security. Her writing and commentary have been featured in the New York Times, MSNBC, CNN, NBC, CBS, The Washington Post, Marie Claire, The Progressive, Essence, Bustle, Big Think, The Miami Herald, Democracy Now!, and numerous NPR affiliates, among others. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest again on this podcast, Dr. C. Nicole Mason. All right, Dr. C. Nicole Mason. How you doing, sister? It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you too. It's been a while. It's been a minute.
Yeah, it's been a minute, but you know, we've been doing our thing, especially you. And the organization's going well, I take it?
Yeah, it's going well. We're really doing good work. And I think it's really timely because it's in this moment when we think about, all that's happening and new strategies and new tactics. I think it's a breath of fresh air. So I'm thinking about well, how do we win? How do we come up with a strategy? Where's the vision? And bringing people together. So really excited about how it's going.
Okay. All right. So first icebreaker you're familiar with is that we throw a quote at you. So this is your quote. Women's health, economic well-being, safety, and political power hinges on the state they reside in. This shouldn't be the case. What does that quote mean to you?
No, that's a good quote. That person sounds brilliant. No, kidding. When I think about that quote, so, we did a power and influence index where we looked at where women stood across the 50 states and where they had the most power, least power, their health, economic well-being. And, the findings weren't that shocking. We know where women are thriving and where they're not. What was shocking to me is that when we mapped it, was that you could be living in the state of Maryland, cross over to Virginia, go down to Mississippi, and you'd have another bundle of rights, a different set of rights. You could be worse off economically than if you lived in Maryland or DC, especially for women of color, Black women. And to be honest, Erik, and, sometimes I hate when I make this comparison, but we haven't seen something like this in about 400 years, where your rights are determined by the state that you live in, and that's problematic.
Yeah, well, I don't know why you would hedge on that. I mean, it's basically true, and we've always had that dynamic because of the way that the United States are constructed. But, I guess more in recent time, when you look at what was happening in the Jim Crow states and what was happening everywhere else. And that's why I've been telling people, if you want to deal with authoritarianism, you might need to talk to Black folks, because a lot of folks lived through that just like
Right.
50, 60 years ago. So.
Right. And there's like you said, it wasn't that long ago. They're still alive. There are stories to be told. And there's also ways to respond. Like we have, people are always talking about, oh, what are the signs of authoritarianism? Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm like, but yeah, you can spend our time doing that, but we could also spend our time thinking about how to fight back against authoritarianism. And we do know how to, but you got to talk to the right people, like you said.
That's exactly right. All right. So I added a new icebreaker since the last time we talked, and it's called 20 questions. So
I'm here for it.
All right. So I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
I'm going to do 8.
Okay. What is one thing you hope the current administration will do or not do during this term?
Well, they're doing everything I don't want them to do. Like there's literally not one thing that they're doing that I don't want them to do. So so if I wanted them to do something, it would be to stop what they are doing. So stop it. Stop being ridiculous. Stop being racist. Stop being xenophobic. Stop being classist. Stop all your behaviors. So I would want them to stop.
Yeah. So you're saying you want them to stop. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but if there was something I wanted them to do, it would also be to stop. Like stop and stop.
So look, since we brought that up, about 7 million people got out on a Saturday and said, yeah, we want them to stop too. So what were your thoughts about the No Kings protest that happened just recently? And then earlier this year, there were about 5 million people that came out. What are your thoughts about that? Because I've heard some interesting perspectives.
I was there both times. I think we need sustained action, and 7 million people, 8 million people showing up one time, one day is powerful. We need to do that every day. This needs to be our job. Like you don't fight authoritarianism on a Saturday because that's when people are not at work, and they have the free time and it's a couple hours out of the day. And what we know from the civil rights movement and fighting back against these kinds of regimes, I'm going to call it, is that it takes sustained effort, sustained resistance. And I'm going to even say, and this is around Black Lives Matter, I told my kids, we went to the rallies in DC, and I said, we're going to show up here every weekend until something changes. And about after the third weekend, it was just people just selling T-shirts. I said, well, where is the reason? I thought we were going to be out here, every weekend or doing this every day, And so I think that in this moment, that's what we sustained resistance. I don't know. I think I've heard some of the critiques about the No Kings March, but what else are we doing, people? What else? What are we going to do?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I heard was what you addressed, that it's one thing, because I heard somebody say, well, that's not a protest, that's a rally. It's like a protest is something sustainable, something that you're constantly doing. And so I agree with you on that. And I've been there, done that when you're talking about, okay, yeah, so we're going to meet every Friday. We're going to have this prayer in front of the governor's mansion and all this stuff. And it started off with like 150 people. And about 2 months in, it was down to the devoted 7. You know what I'm saying? And so that's part of the strategy, is that they're hoping for attrition and lack of interest as opposed to something sustainable. So we're in agreement with that. And I think most people feel that way. And hopefully the protests will lead to some kind of sustainable action. Have you had a chance to read Vice President Harris's book, 107 Days?
I have not, but I do have it. And I do have it. I have like a stack of books here. So I do have it. I haven't read it. I will read it because I want to review it. But I have enjoyed, can I just say, watching the clips from the tour. They have been amazing because she feels unleashed. She feels empowered, and she has something to say. Like, she's telling her story, but I think in her story are some instructive lessons about what not to do and how to treat people.
And it's like in the book, I mean, from the very jump, when the word unleashed is the perfect word for it, because from the opening introduction, she was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna read this. It sounds like she didn't put the earrings down. She put the Vaseline on the face. She ready to go. You know what I'm saying? And she does it. And she's very, very open and retrospective about the campaign. And, it's very hard for us that have run for office when we suffer a defeat, especially for a position that we really wanted, to kind of peel back and say, okay, what did I do wrong? Where did I not make the right connection? Whatever, So it's very, very revealing. I got the audio version because I wanted to hear her talk. Because in this day and age, I'm tired of hearing the current president. So I wanted to hear the president I voted for. So I got the.
I think I'm going to do that too. I have a couple of Audible credits out of. I have the hard copy, but I think I'm going to go ahead and do what you did so I can take a listen. and hear it in her own voice, So I'm going to do that too.
Okay. All right. So there's been a steady decline of women in the workplace since the beginning of the year. Experts cite three factors: demanding employees to return to the workplace, the rising cost of childcare, and mass deportation. One, and so since you coined the phrase secession, is this an example of the secession continuing, or has it accelerated?
This is something completely different. The she session was explaining an economic downturn, like a recession, and, understanding that the job losses that were happening were disproportionately impacting women. So that is that. What we're seeing now is something completely man-made. It's man-made. By that I mean it's the administration's doing. And some of it has been really exacting. The 300,000 Black women pushed out of the workforce. That's not, unintentional. When you understand that majority of Black women, a lot of Black women, a good size of Black women are employed in the federal government. They work in the federal government. And then when you say, I'm just going to go by and cut all federal, fire federal employees and, reduction in force, you have to understand that's going to have a disproportionate impact on Black women and destabilize communities, destabilize families. And so it's not unintentional. And then, the fear, the backlash around people. I'm not even going to say DI because I don't think we should call it that. I said we should say what it is. It's the backlash against Black and brown progress. That's what it is. It's not it's anti-DI, it's anti-progress, it's anti-Blackness. It is racism. And so, and there are no protections. There are no, when we talk about the fund, the venture fund that was committed to funding Black women businesses, taking that to court, making it so that they can't give grants and support to Black women businesses. This is not leveling the field. This is racism. This is trying to thwart progress. And so I think we should call it that, as opposed to getting into some debate around DEI, whether we need it or not. That's not what this is about. So the job losses, I think, are very intentional. I don't want to be conspiratorial here around, Trump's targeting of Black women, but we've seen it. And this is just another iteration of that. And it weakens the Democratic base, which, so that's what I think. I think we need to be connecting the dots and more intentionally.
Yeah, it's definitely has not only economic but political ramifications. And that was one of the things I was trying to tell people is like, look, if Project 2025 is enacted, then Black folks are going to suffer the most because the biggest employer of Black people in the United States is the federal government, right? And then next is state and local government. So when you're talking about cutting government jobs, you're impacting our community. And some folks, like you said, didn't connect the dots, but they're coloring in the lines now. They're figuring it out. And so hopefully we can get in there and do something over the next 3.5 years, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm not, we'll see.
You stated earlier this year that women hold significant political power, yet policy choices and deepening disparities prevent them from fully realizing it. So my question out of that is, do you expect more women to emerge as candidates in the 2026 elections?
Yeah, I think so. And we're very closely with a couple organizations focused on getting women elected to office. I work closely with Vote Run Lead. And yeah, I think more women are raising their hand to run more now than ever. I think everybody, if you want to run for office, Erik, you did it. I mean, I couldn't do it. It's just, it's too much. But if you feel like you want to do it, I think you should do it. I do think that there's some other structural issues that we need to deal with to make running and winning possible. So the gerrymandering issue, some other structural reforms, campaign finance reform, some new things like ranked choice voting makes it easier in terms of representation. There are a few things that, run, but, it's still very hard to run and win. And then when you get there, you don't have any power because, you just got there. So how do we fix that so that if we elect that we actually do get the right people in office, they can actually do something or change? I mean, at the national level, we see it. It's just a high level of dysfunction all around on both sides. I'm not going to say it's just the Republicans. I think Democrats are also lost their way too. But when it all comes down to it, Democrats don't have any power. I mean, I don't know if you just, I was reading the news. I only read the headlines now. And then, if I want to go deep, I will. But Trump is about to ask the Department of Justice, and he's going to get it for $230 million to cover his legal fees for his impeachment trials and he's going to get it. I said, this man is robbing us blind, but he did it the first time, and he's back with more power and more authority, and he is lining his pockets, and so are his friends. And who do we go see about that? That's the cold part about it, as my father would say. Who do we go see about that? And there are no levers right now, as far as I can see, to address this. And our leaders cannot, or at least they're not. So run for office, but it feels hard.
One of the things, Doc, that I'd say, I think I've only told one person that told me they wanted to run for office not to run. And that was because they had run several times before and they had some family issues. And I said, you need to focus on that because you're not going to be able to do that and run effectively if you do that. Other than that, I tell people to run. Now, the trick is getting people to understand that once you get elected, that's when the hard part is. Running for office. And then the other thing I remind people is that in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man or the one-eyed woman in this case is king or queen, right? So you need to not only learn how to run for the position, but you need to learn the position before you take that oath. You need to understand what powers you have, understand the rules, especially if you get into a legislative body.
Right.
Because my personal experience, because I had that knowledge, once I was voting on stuff and speaking against bills, my machine wasn't even working, right? I had to physically tell them yes or no on the bill. So the more prepared you are going in, I think kind of negates some of the, for lack of a better word, impotence that you might feel getting in that position, right? I think that's the key. So training, is the education is the ultimate thing. But we can do a whole show about that. I'm gonna keep going because I know you got other things to do. What are your thoughts concerning the Trump administration's threat to go after nonprofits that don't jive with his agenda?
Well, I'm also of the mind, so some, I work in this sector. I get funding from foundations, and there's a lot of fear. And so there's some organizations and some foundations that are preemptively complying or changing, the language on their websites. They are not funding organizations that they funded because they don't want to raise scrutiny. And I think that that's not the way we should be thinking about this. I think we need to say, okay, do it because you're not doing anything wrong. So let us engage. Let us come after me and let's go. Let's engage, because I think by backing down, by preemptively complying, we send the message that there is something wrong about the work that we're doing. There is something wrong about what foundations fund. There is something not right about wanting justice, equity, and fighting back against a repressive administration. And by not complying, we send the message that I think the right message that, well, what are you going to do? Like, what's the end game? I think people haven't thought, like, what is the end game? So the end game is you're going to lose your status. Well, then maybe we also need to be thinking about new ways of running organizations and foundations that are not dependent on this one code in our tax code. So it's a real scary time, I think, for organizations. By scary, I mean fearful. Like people are running scared or preparing and lawyering up. Even when I get grants now, I mean, you used to spend so much time in legal making sure that and I just wrote about this yesterday. Funders are frozen. They're not giving. So he is essentially indirectly killing whole sectors of work because funders have frozen and have stopped giving money, or they're giving money to other things. Like they've taken it from racial equity work or women's issues or health and put it into stuff like art and AI and technology. Whole foundations have pivoted to AI technology. I'm like, what? You have really big Democratic funders or liberal funders who I personally feel are turncoats, like the one Mark Benioff, who was a huge funder of liberal causes, progressive causes, Salesforce, who has now offered to help ICE figure out how to hire people more effectively. So he has, again, it's where the political winds are turning. And for me, that also sends a message about my work, about just how disposable and vulnerable it is.
Well, you might be right on the Salesforce guy, but he might be trying to be the enemy behind the lines, because what the latest report I just heard is that the ICE agents can't do push-ups. They can't pass a physical test. So maybe he's like, yeah, I'll help you find these people. Let me get the fattest, slowest, most dumbest.
He might be gumming up the system.
Yeah. So, we don't know. But, I always try to think positive of some people. But I do agree with your assessment about giving in before, because, we've been told, those of us that pay attention to those things, that the easiest way for a dictator to take power is to acquiesce in advance. And it's like, okay, that makes sense. It's like, don't give in to the person, fight them all the way to the end. I mean, legends and historic figures have emerged because they fought to the end. Those of you who profess to be Christian, I mean, Jesus was flipping tables at the temple. I mean, anyway, again, don't let me get carried away on your soapbox. Let's talk about your work and what kind of hope that you're finding in doing this kind of work. Because even though the times are challenging, what is it that you see that keeps you going and give you the hope that things are going to change?
Well, because they always change, they have to. Sometimes when I look at the news or I read a headline or I see what's going on, I'm like, oh my God, this is bad. But what gives me hope, what gives me inspiration is that the collective we, have come out on the other side of other things. We have been through a civil war, let us not forget. We have been through Jim Crow. We have been, these times are bad, but I do think we do understand what the arc is here. I think what's different is that, if we're being really honest here, there are some people who benefit from the stratification and benefit from proximity. Or, everything is very self-interest, like what's in it for me. And you saw that in the 2024 election. And so there's the idea of a collective, like my fate is tied to your fate. What happens to you happens to me. We don't, in the public imagination, or the way we think about things, that's not our leading frame. Right now it's, well, what are you going to do for me? What do I get out of this? Well, if it's not impacting my family or what's going on, I don't really care about it. And it's very self-interested politics, or a way of thinking about what's happening. So if we were in danger of anything, I would say that, or not getting to the other side, it's because we're fragmented, or, people are thinking about themselves. So what gives me hope is trying to figure out how to bring people together in coalition and connection. And I do believe our fates are tied. I've always believed that. I mean, when in my early 20s, or, I would show up for anybody's march, immigration march, I'm there. IMF, I'm there, when I'm there, so because I really believe that it might be this issue, but the underlying values, the underlying belief system, we all shared, and I'm having a hard time sort of trying to pull that thread together. So, but I'm optimistic that I wake up every day thinking about, like, what's your part today? Like, what are you going to say? So it's my writing, it's my organizing, it's my research. I think all that, gives the people a different way to think about a topic or a subject, or, increases understanding. So, so I'm over here doing my part. So I think, and showing up even for the, no kings. I don't care if it's, you tell me another march is next week, I'll be there, because that's what we have to do.
Yeah, I think, and that's something I'm probably going to address in an editorial, something like that. But when I was sitting there listening to you, I was thinking about, we kind of line up more on coincidence than we do on consciousness, right? It just so happens that if my healthcare is impacted and your healthcare is impacted, then we both get together and protest about our healthcare being impacted. It's not that it's like from Jump Street, the whole concept coming down should have been stopped before it got to the point where it impacted me or you, right? That we should have had that moral clarity to fight for something first before it got to me, and now I got to make emergency decisions, right? So anyway.
Well, people think it's not going to, that's, again, I don't want to, people think it's not, like, you've heard people, well, some people, you heard people say, like, well, I didn't think, it was going to happen to me, or I was going to lose my job, or, I thought he was going to take those immigrants away, not my, and it's like, okay, so, it's just, that's what's problematic, that people, even in 2024, when they were going in the voting booth, couldn't see the connections. They were like, that has nothing to do with me. and here we are. Like, everybody's hurting. The economy's hurting. I get my health insurance through an exchange because it's easier that way. That's about to go away for everybody. If you're self-employed, if elderly, farmers, truckers, everybody without employer-related insurance. 5 million people will be impacted right off the cup. And it has a trickling effect. Like, everybody's premiums are going to go up, even if you have employer-covered insurance. So I really wish that people would have connected the dots sooner. I'm hoping that in the coming months, in the coming years, that they will.
So one of the things that you're doing, because this is at the point where I ask my guests to promote stuff. One of the things you're doing to try to help people connect the dots is this new Substack that you got going on, the Perfect 10. So talk about that, and then, how people can subscribe to it and all that. And then if people want to reach out to you and your organization, Future Forward Women, just go ahead and make your appeal.
So Future for Women is about building women's power and influence across all 50 states. We work on a range of issues: economic justice, health equity, reproductive rights and justice. And we need your voice. We need you engaged. We need you reading our reports. We need you sharing our reports and our actions. So that's the first thing. And again, it seems to be a very dark time, but one of the things I'm very clear about is that to get where we want to go, we need to be inspired. We need to be leading with vision, and it needs to be rooted in the lives of everyday people. And so that's the our philosophy and our work. The Perfect 10, the newsletter, it's commentary. It's my writing. It's my take on some of these issues and what's happening, and helping to connect the dots and asking the questions. So one of the things that's true, and you know this, Erik, because you have your podcast, is that I've been really shocked by the media. The people say it's mainstream media, but we're going to call them the media corporations, because that's what you have to know, because you know that they're driven by the bottom line. And so if you look across these big corporations, these media corporations, all the voices, all the Black and brown voices, Black women, Black male voices have disappeared. So you're not getting the take on what's happening. You're not getting the analysis that you need to be able to inform an opinion. And NBC, for example, just cut all of their diversity. I'm putting diversity in quotes. You can't see that. Writers and sections. And so what you've left with are people like you, Erik, me, Joyanne Reed, Karen, who got fired from the Washington Post for calling Charlie Kirk. She didn't say anything. She just reposted his tweet. All on Substack, giving that analysis that you would see on any news station, or you used to be able to see when you turn on the TV. So it's the Perfect 10 issues impacting women's lives. And, follow me, read me, share it. It's fun. I think I'm funny and insightful, and, it's great. But most importantly, I don't care what you do. I just want you to do something. I want you to get out there, go to the No Kings March, or don't. Talk to your neighbor, volunteer. We need everybody doing everything in their own way.
Yeah. Well, Dr. C. Nicole Mason, it's always an honor to talk to you. And I really am pleased that you follow the rule that once you've been invited, you're welcome to come back. And, just obviously, as long as I've got this podcast, I don't intend this to be the last time we talk. Even now, I just feel good that there are sisters out there like you that are fighting, and you're fighting intelligently, and you're fighting ferociously at the same time. And, we're here to keep each other encouraged. And I hope that, what you've said today gives people encouragement and gives them some food for thought. So again, thank you for coming on the podcast again. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Erik. And yeah, I can't wait to come back. Have me back.
All right, guys, we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. And so now it's time for my next guest, Maura Gillespie. Maura Gillespie has over 12 years of government service as a Capitol Hill veteran. She most recently served as the Deputy Chief of Staff for now former Congressman Adam Kinzinger, where she led his office as the head of communications for nearly 7 years. Prior to joining the Kinzinger team, Maura worked for former Speaker of the House John A. Boehner in his administrative and press operations over a 5-year span. As a founding partner of the Country First movement, led by Adam Kinzinger, Maura served as the chief spokesperson and chief strategist for the organization. engaging with people from across the political spectrum who felt lost and frustrated by the hyper-partisan political landscape we find ourselves in today. An expert on communication, strategy, and messaging, Maura oversaw a significant portfolio for an active and often outspoken member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and the Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. Originally from the Garden State, Maura continues to engage with the political process through her consulting company, Blue Stack Strategies, LLC, and interviews by sharing insight from her unique congressional experience. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Maura Gillespie. All right, Maura Gillespie, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Erik.
Well, I as stated before, I am really, really glad to get you. I've been kind of following you. There's a number of people I watch on TV and pay attention to when they come on, and you have been one of them. I think that you have a very, very unique experience in dissecting what is going on in politics and what has been going on over the last few years. And so when I was finally able to get you on, I was like, yay, I gotta. So I'm really, really happy to talk to you today.
Well, thank you.
So how I normally do this thing, I do a couple of icebreakers.
Mm-hmm.
So the first icebreaker I throw on the guest is a quote. And your quote is, with the highs, the lows, and all the in-betweens, everything happens for a reason. What does that quote mean to you?
You know, throughout my either life and also through my political career, there were times where I really wanted one thing to turn out how I wanted it. But I am a person of faith. And so I know that as much as I want something to happen or as much as I think it should happen, a lot of times it's just not up to me. And it always does happen for the right reasons. And we may not be able to see it in the moment, but the big picture, I believe that even in our lowest of lows, there's a reason why we're going through that at that particular time, because what we're going to see on the other end is going to make it all clear. And then so much more poignant almost in that it was worth it because of what we ended up with. So I think with, when I think about my time with Boehner, right, I didn't want that to end. I didn't want it to end the way it did. And I worry about what was next. And I'm a person that likes to plan and likes to know what's going to happen. And a lot of times you just can't, and especially in politics, which is funny that I'm, in politics, you can't always plan for it. But I do believe that the highs, the lows, they all teach us that it happens for a reason and we're better because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're on the same faith journey, and, the way that it was always colloquialized is it's going to be better on the other side of the mountain. Right.
Yeah.
And so, I definitely relate to that. So the next icebreaker is what I call 20 questions.
Mm-hmm.
So I need you to give me a number between 1 and 20.
11.
Okay.
It's my birthday. That was just an easy one for me.
Where do you go to check a fact that you see, hear, or read?
See, hear, or read. I will Google it first, right? If I have a question, or type it in. And then I usually will read at least 3 different things to make sure. So 3 different sources, whether that is an article that pops up first, scroll down a little further, but I usually try and read at least 3 different things on one topic to get a better picture of what's going on.
Yeah. How did you decide that you wanted to make a career out of politics?
When I was really little, I want to say first grade, I wanted to be a lawyer. And largely because my great uncle Mike and my father are both lawyers. And I thought I was really good at arguing. And so I figured this is great for me. I'm going to be a lawyer just like them. I'm really good at arguing and making my case and asking questions and things like that. And as I got older and through school, I sort of navigated towards history and really enjoyed learning and writing. I was one of those weird
kids that really liked writing papers as I got, into high school and things. I did presidential classroom in high school where you do almost like a mock Congress down in Washington, D.C. And I knew I wanted to be in D.C. then. And my uncle had been in politics and he's my godfather. And so I was also really inspired by him and his journey and his role. And just, I think there's those tying those two things of having wanted to be a lawyer, but then also really enjoyed the writing and being part of something bigger than myself. Politics was just that natural fit for me. And so in high school, I knew I wanted to pursue political science and history in college. And my sisters both went to school in DC, so I chose to go to school in Baltimore or Baltimore, if you're from the area, and make my way down there. But I wanted to have my own experience in my own little city. So I'm happy with how I did it, but was able to do internships and be part of the political scene. But it started at a young age. I also wanted to be the first female president when I was in first grade. So I had real, aspirations as a young kid.
Yeah, I definitely can relate to that. I think, and I tell this story a lot, and some people don't believe me because of the age, but I ever since I was 3 years old, I had wanted to be president of the United States. And to date myself, it was like I had a set of World Book encyclopedias.
Yes.
And it was like the coolest section was the president's section because the first 2 pages are just the portraits of the presidents. Yeah. And I said, I want my picture right there. And it was like, I knew all presidential trivia, all that kind of stuff. I mean, I just really, outside of baseball, that was my passion as a young kid. And
isn't it funny that, yeah. No, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, and I didn't have the background like you where I didn't have anybody in my immediate family engaged in politics, but they always voted. And so I would go down to the polling place and my great aunt would sit me down and while she was babysitting me and we watched the news. So I was learning all the people through the news and stuff as a child. So yeah, I just, that's how I got indoctrinated. And like I tell people, my precinct captain was also my little league baseball coach growing up in Chicago. So it was just always in my environment, but it still kind of amazed people that I pursued politics the way I did.
Absolutely. Yeah, especially just having the surroundings and you just gravitating towards it. But I also think what you said about having the encyclopedia, it does make me laugh because I have, my little, cousins, nieces, nephews. They're never going to know what it was like to go through the encyclopedia and have these ginormous books that at some point in time over the last 10, 15 years, I think my parents used it to I think their baseboard broke or something. They're using it to hold up the baseboard of a bed, these massive Britannica encyclopedia books.
Yeah. It's like, what? These were book. How many books did you have?
I know.
It was in alphabetical order. It was pretty.
Yep.
All right. So what have you retained from being on Team Boehner and Team Kinzinger that has influenced you the most in your political career?
There's so many Boehnerisms that come to mind, but I just think the way that I'll start with Boehner. So Boehner, when I first started as an intern during my college years, I interned on the House floor. So through the Republican cloakroom, which is a really unique internship to have, but because you're there when members are taking phone calls in these phone booths because they're not supposed to have their phones out on the floor. You're helping them figure out which votes they're on and different things like speaking arrangements and speaking order for House floor speeches. But I think that what I saw from that point through Boehner's time as speaker until the very end, and even till now, he really does treat everyone the same way. So whether I was an intern or if I were the chief of staff, he really was just himself. And I respected that immensely. I also love that he had his door open. He had a really good friendship with several members, but Democrats would come at the time. I remember when he was speaker, Harry Reid's office was the Senate majority leaders. And there was a way to go from Harry Reid's office around to the back and then go into Boehner's office if you wanted to, not go in the hallway where the press was. And there were plenty of members who would come back there and want to chat with him. And the door was always open. And I think I take away from that is the ability to disagree without being disagreeable, but open to conversation, open to having that conversation. Even if you're not going to end up in agreement, you'll know where the other person stands by allowing a conversation to happen. And so I think that just the way that he operated and wanted to take a small step forward, even if it was a small step forward, just to get the ball moving, recognizing that you can't do everything on your own and that you need to be able to be willing to work with others to get there. Boehner taught me a lot of things, and being part of his team taught me a lot of things. I think with Kinzinger, it was such a interesting time to go from where I started with him, beginning of 2016 through to when he was on the January 6th committee and doing those hearings, and just, remembering that, something that I told him was, when he was asked to be on the January 6th committee, it was something about, it's a tough decision to make, but when you look back on it, will you be able to look at yourself in the mirror and be proud of what you did? And I think of that a lot. I think about when I go on TV interviews, I'm going to say what I believe because I'm not beholden to anything else but myself. And I think for a lot of us who worked for Team Kinzinger, recognizing the importance of that moment, but also the importance of standing up for what you believe in and not being afraid of what the political fallout may be, but because you know that it's the right thing to do. And again, in the grand scheme of things, you'd rather be true to who you are than be something else. I'll take that with me every day.
Yeah. And that's, when I think about those guys, even though we're on the opposite side of the aisle, it just reminds me of when I was in the legislature and just the fact, I didn't have the secret passageway. Because in Georgia, I found out there is a secret passageway between, it was like the chair of the Black Caucus had a secret passageway to the governor's office. I found that out. He picked that office because it had the passageway.
Yeah.
But we had like the back couch, and I'll tell the story real quick. So when I moved to the back of the chamber, when I had enough seniority to pick my own seat, me and my Republican counterpart, Philip Gunn, who ended up being Speaker of the House after I was out, we were talking, and then another guy came. I forgot, was it Steve Holland or somebody else? But anyway, it was about four of us eventually were talking in the back, and we were standing, and one of us said, I can't remember which one, I don't think it was me, but one of us said, it'd be nice to have a couch back here to just kind of sit back and talk instead of just standing. And the next day, I think there was a porter nearby that heard that, because the next day there was a couch back there. And oh man, the meetings that we used to have back in the back, when it was like voter ID or something about the budget or anything like that, we were solving the problem. Whatever was going on up in the front, we were working it out back in the back. So I definitely relate to that. And I miss that politics is not like that now, especially at the federal level.
Me too.
What are your thoughts on the No Kings protests that have happened this year?
I think it's really telling that so many people turned out. I've seen so many different takes on it. And speaking as a Republican, I was disappointed with Speaker Johnson saying that it was a hate America. I think as we say, it was a hate America rally is what he called it or something. I don't see how you could say that. And I'm saying this as a Republican. I don't see how you could see people who are frustrated with their government peacefully protesting and say they're unhappy with it. There's nothing more American than using your voice and expressing. It's what, if you think about America's foundation, how we came to be here, we're about to celebrate 250 years of this grand experiment of our democracy and this republic. And it all started with saying enough is enough. We're not okay with what this is. And we're advocating for a change. We're advocating for something different. And so you don't have to agree. And I'm speaking this to all people. You don't have to agree with them with people who are protesting. You don't have to agree with it, but you cannot say that they don't have the right to do so. And I made this equation because I don't think it's the same thing. Obviously, what happened on January 6th turned horrifically violent and just, and so it was an insurrection. And I know there's people who say that it wasn't, but it was. But what started out as a rally to say that they were feeling as though their voices weren't heard. They didn't agree with the government. They're upset with the government. And so initially, what started out as a rally, which is, people who supported that, how can you then say that the people who are rallying against what they don't like, they feel like their voices aren't being heard, they're frustrated with the government, and they want to speak up about it? So I just think it's hypocritical to sit there and try and call it something else. But so I think that it's a good thing for Democrats to have this rallying cry, because for a little while, I feel as though Democrats have felt a little bit lost and kind of directionless. And this has given them something to really galvanize around. And it's bringing out, millions of people. It's really impressive.
Well, if I was part of the press corps, I would have asked the speaker this question. What is the difference between a No Kings rally and a Tea Party rally?
Mm-hmm.
Because, the Democrats were not happy about the Tea Party rallies, but I don't remember any of them saying, oh, these people are unpatriotic and all that stuff. It was like, hey guys, we got a bunch of people out here in the streets that don't like what we're doing. And, we got to figure out how we're going to navigate that. Right. And, I don't even remember the Democrats really even saying anything about the Tea Party other than, they were just, dealing with particular policies about the protesters themselves. I don't remember that now. They may have, I don't know, but I don't remember that. I think we were at a different time where it was like, okay, well, these people out in the streets, that means that we got to mobilize our folks so, we can get reelected, and that was kind of the mood around the midterm, I guess, in 2010. So I don't know. I just, and it kind of leads to my next question about Charlie Kirk's assassination. And my question was, what was your hope, or what is your hope about American politics in the aftermath of that? And I asked that because I saw something, and I don't think I heard all of your interview, but it seemed like it kind of, it touched you in a certain way. And you weren't crying emotional, but I could tell that bothered you a great deal. So just kind of talk about what was your thoughts like when you heard it happened, and what would you like to see going forward?
So I know what interview you're talking about, and I was slated to do Bloomberg, and prior, to that incident happening, that tragedy happening. And so I went on air maybe less than an hour after it was confirmed that he was killed. And I had seen the videos that were posted on to X or Twitter. Not that I wanted to see them, but they were being, posted in real time. And just the idea of that happening and then watching it happening just truly struck me for anyone in that situation. I mean, you or I were sitting out there talking at a group and that would happen. That's disgusting and horrific. And why is this political violence in this country, and just violence in general, we have become so numb to it. And I, in that moment, couldn't fathom that we've come this low, that we've come so low that we would go out to kill someone because of their political stances. I'm not defending anything that he has said at all, nor would I, because I don't largely agree with what he had said and what he espoused on his podcast. But it doesn't mean that I don't think he has the right to do so. I think he has that same right that any one of us has as far as using a platform to speak to people because of the fact that we live here in America. And my concern and my sadness came from the state of politics in general. We talked about why I wanted to be in this in the first place is something bigger than myself. And then to see it devolve the way that it has, even from the time that I worked for John Boehner, it has devolved. Again, I talked about how much I enjoyed watching members of Congress from all walks of life and all political leanings come and talk to him, or have a glass of wine, or maybe, have a cigarette, because Boehner, just whatever in that office, they were just able and comfortable to come in and talk to him. And the fact that they felt comfortable enough to knock on the door and say, hey, can I have a few minutes with them? Absolutely. I don't think that happens anymore. And that makes me sad for politics, that and you hear it from members who use this language where they talk about each other as if one another are enemies. And that shouldn't be the case. I don't think that we have gotten a handle on it yet. Obviously, what happened with Charlie Kirk shows me we certainly haven't. And I just don't know how much lower we can go till we hit the bottom, because I would have thought after January 6th that was bottom, and then it wasn't. And so we've continued to hit further and further. And I mourn for what used to be normal political discourse. I hope for it again. And I think part of what this is and what I'm trying to do is to bring that back and to have normal conversations with people who, even when, and especially when we don't agree, how to be able to have a conversation. Because you can leave it there, right? We can say, I don't agree with you here, but I hear you. So thanks for sharing your viewpoint. here's mine. That's okay to leave a conversation there. It doesn't need to have a resolution in terms of let's now find a way for us to agree. We don't have to, but we can have conversations and continue on and then talk about, the game tonight or what's going on this weekend. We've lost that ability, and I hope we can bring it back. And I think that's my hope, is that having broader civic engagement and reminding people that conversation and honest conversation without getting too emotional and too partisan will help us in the long run.
Yeah. And, that's exactly what I'm trying to do with this podcast. And I think there's others that are trying to do the same thing, but I don't know. I just, it's a harder road than I thought it would be. And when people say, well, Erik, are you going to get back in? You're going to run for something else? I said, I'm a dinosaur. I'm from that age where it's like, I could sit and have drinks with a Republican. I could, play golf. We could talk about anything. And then we could sit there and debate about a particular issue, and try to convince each other which way, because that's the only way you get stuff done in that kind of arena, is that you got to find out what people are thinking. I was a crazy dude. And when I ran for statewide office, it gave me a different perspective the next legislative session I showed up in, because I was in everybody's district at one point campaigning. And so it's like, so that's why so-and-so votes the way he does, or that's why she takes this position as opposed to, some other stuff. So I just think we got to get back to a level of understanding. And, I don't think bullets are designed for negotiation. That's kind of my thought process. Do you think Mamdani's populism is the future of the Democratic Party?
On a broad scale, no, but I do think that his tactics, and I know it's been talked about by Democrats at large, but they realize that the grassroots efforts and the meeting people where they are, which is really getting into, which I think is a tactic that most people should use. And it's kind of what you were just saying right then, right? You were meeting people where they were. You were going into their communities and you were understanding where they're coming from, because you saw and you talked to people and you heard from them and heard what they were going through or what they were focused on or worried about. And I think what Mamdani did was he went to where people were and understood that they're hurting here. They're worried about this. And yes, he has his own aspirations. He has his own political feelings and things of that nature. And Democrats at large aren't going to agree with that. But him meeting people where they were and people where they are in New York City, that's resonated. And Democrats should absolutely adopt a more everyman approach to politics, which they haven't done in the last few cycles, and really focusing on people at the grassroots level, because it's something that can be clearly tapped into and also better represented if they listen to their constituents.
Yes, because first of all, that's the reason why I've admired you so, because that's very brilliant. That it's not about the specific policies that he's espousing, but the fact that he's kind of talking to people, doing this retail politics, going door to door, listening to people. And so some of his ideas have shaped from what he's heard, whether they're realistic or not, whether they're attainable or not. The fact is that people, when they go into that voting booth, say, I'm voting for that guy because he at least addressed something that has been bothering me for a long time. And, he's different than Obama or Harold Washington, to date myself, in Chicago, is that his campaign is not about a hope for an eloquent speaker or a dynamic representative of whether it's the United States or a particular city. He is being a true public servant. At least that's how he's carrying himself out. It's like, look, I want to be the mayor. If you were coming to the mayor's office, what would you complain about? Right. And he's trying his best to incorporate that in his thing, and it's working for him. And I think other other Democrats need to do that. I heard somebody saying that he was the embodiment of what people have been trying to tell Democrats, that, don't come across as a college professor giving a lecture about policy and this is why the universe works the way it does. That people don't want that. They don't want to feel like you're talking down to them. They want to feel like they're because people are investing in you. People are giving their trust to you to handle that business because they don't have time to go to the Capitol building or City Hall and do that. But you asked for the job, so we want to trust that you can do it and have some integrity about it. Because even if you don't agree with his policies or his beliefs, a lot of times people gravitate to the fact that, well, people have been jumping on him about that and he stood firm on that. Hey, I got to respect that. That sounds like to me that he's got integrity, And so it's really, really simple, but it just seems so complicated to get political people in this day and age to figure that out. I don't know.
No, and you're right. I mean, you can disagree with him, which I don't live in New York City, but you can disagree with him on a whole host of things. But when you're in that voting booth and you've already had a conversation with him, or you feel as though he heard you and he's willing to do the job and he's going to at least really try for you, that can make you vote for him simply on that alone. Because again, you also look at your other options. It's not great, right? Let's just be serious. It's not great. So you're like, okay, this guy really seems like he wants to try and he seems like he's going to try to do a good job. Like it may not, I don't agree with everything, but he seems like he heard me and he heard my community. Let's give it a go. I think that there's more likely than not people who are in that boat, right? Who are saying, he seems like he wants to try, I don't know that I agree with him on a lot of things, but I care about cost here. I care about my kids getting to school and having a bus system to go to. All right, let's give this a go. So I think that's part of it too.
Yeah. And see, I'm of an age where I remember when Kura Sliwa was cool, right? With the Guardian. I'm of an
beret.
Yeah. And Mario Cuomo was, it's like, oh, his son, I'm thinking Cuomos are going to be like the Kennedys. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of disappointing, but politics is also about timing. And Mamdani is in the right place at the right time to be in the position that he's in. Who's winning the shutdown right now?
Well, I can tell you, we're the ones who are losing, right? The American people are the ones that are losing. That's for sure. The scary part is that both sides think that they are winning. So you ask Democrats, they feel pretty confident that they are in a good place, that they are doing what's needed to galvanize their voters and their base to show they're putting up this fight and fighting for them. Republicans stand firm in that Democrats are causing the shutdown and that they're the ones that started it, and that, and I've even said this a couple times on TV, but, when everyone gets so upset about not having a conversation and the president not being willing to talk, with Democratic leaders, it is what happened, in 2013. President Obama didn't want to talk to us as Republicans in Congress until the threat of the shutdown was over, because having that hanging over him and having it hang over the government, he felt was not even a non-starter. And so eventually was resolved through very little wins for the Republicans, as I recall. But the Senate side was able to do a very small thing to get, the shutdown to end, and then conversations resumed after that. And so I do think in that context, it's what's going to have to happen. Senator Thune's going to have to show good faith effort to his Democratic colleagues in the Senate that a vote or not even just a vote on the subsidies, but an actual package, I think, needs to be put in place, because what's confusing to viewers and to people who aren't necessarily in the weeds on this is that you have one side saying that healthcare costs are going to go up, which is fact. They are going to go up, but they also may go up regardless of this thing getting extended, because the subsidies are really, it's for the insurance companies. And it's a Band-Aid that was put in place during the pandemic. So it was from 21 to 25. And it was because, quite frankly, Obamacare hasn't worked out the way that they had hoped. So they have to do some restructuring. There has to be something done. Like, they need to do some reforms. And the Republicans, anything that even says, ACA, but Obamacare, they turn their nose up at and refuse to even want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Well, that's not helpful at all, because they have to. This is the law of the land. So you need to be able to work within the framework that is the law of the land. And I think that's what's frustrating to people on the outside. It's like, well, listen, you're both sitting in your corners. You've got to come to the middle. And I think that has to start with ending the shutdown and then Thune taking the reins and putting together, whether it's, Senate Finance Committee chairs, whether it's the Senate Help Committee chairs, bringing them into a room and having them flesh out, okay, what do we need to do to make the system better? Because it's not working the way it's supposed to. We can't keep putting a Band-Aid on it to help out the insurance company so that they won't jack up prices on consumers, which is what's happening or what's going to happen. And how do we do that? And I just think that it's not as simple as one vote here is going to save you from having higher prices. And, it's just not as simple as both sides are making it seem, but it has to start with the end of a shutdown because we hurt as Americans. We're the ones who are going to hurt with this continue to go on any longer.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I just think that, and I've, in my legislative career, I've shut down the chamber individually and all that, but there was an end game, right?
Mm-hmm. The plan.
Yeah. And so, what I get the fact that the Democrats are saying, yeah, well, this is what we want. Right. And now, and then Thune has said, well, let's keep the government open and then we can talk about it. Now, Thune it can't be tone deaf to not understand that there's no trust in the room. Right. And
trust
more than just saying, oh, well, we're going to talk about it. It's like, even when it was friendlier times in politics when I served, yeah, it's like, are you saying that or is somebody pushing the button to say that? Because if that's the case, let's have that conversation. If the guy at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue is not agreeing to that, we don't trust what you're saying. Because the minute we say, okay, we're voting for it, and the shutdown's over with, then it's like, and we don't get anything before December. It's like, no. And then that's going to make it harder and harder. Same with like Representative Revolva. And yeah, I'm trying to say her name right. I'm going to learn it.
I know, Sam. That's okay. We'll get there.
But it's like, if I'm Speaker Johnson and I need one vote, I know I'll never get her because of the way that he's treated her. You see what I'm saying? You'll never get her vote. It's like, why I got to wait a month? And it's like somebody in your party can get in like the next day before the Secretary of State even has the ballot, right? I mean, those are just little things like that. That's the only commodity you have in that building is trust. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
If your word is not worth anything, you're not going to get anything done. It doesn't matter what party you're in, what district you come from, what part of the state you're in, or part of the country. If you don't develop a cachet of trust, you cannot be effective. And that's why we're at the impasse we're in. But again, this is the interview to you. I'm not getting on my...
And just, one more thing on that. I think not only just with Grijalva, but optically, the fact that the House has not been in since September 19th, or hasn't had votes since September 19th, and they're going to get paid this week. Members will get paid, but their staffers who have been there day in, day out will not. And I'm not just speaking because I'm a former staffer, but talking about the whole federal workforce. They will miss out on a paycheck. And in Washington, D.C., where rent is very high, I remember in, the 2019, we had to check in with our staff. It was 36 days that they shut down. So right now, the one that we're currently in is the second longest because the one in 2018, 2019 was the longest. And we had to check in with our staff assistants, our junior staff, and just say, hey, are you all okay to pay rent this month? Because that was a genuine concern. Not getting a paycheck for a month in DC is a concern about, can you afford your rent? And yet you have members who have been home since September 19th, not working in their office, not showing us that they're trying to resolve this issue, which I think is the biggest problem. John Boehner, I used, obviously when he was speaker, the importance was to show up every day and have conversations. Whether or not you walk away from those conversations feeling as though you made any progress or not, having the conversations matters because the American people need to know that you're willing to talk, willing to at least argue with each other, but they're not even talking because they're not even there. And I do think optically this is going to come back and at some point it's going to bite Republicans in the butt for not having been present. The Senate is there, yes, but I just think it's a bad optics.
Yeah. All right. Speaking about the president, who Not what, but who is the future of the Republican Party after Trump?
That is a great question. And I don't have a solid answer to it because I think that it's hard to gauge because nobody can replicate what Trump has done. Nobody can replicate the loyalty he has amassed and in some ways the blind loyalty that he has amassed. So much so that even though, and I talk to folks who are loyalists and MAGA and even when they are frustrated by something, one, you see Marjorie Taylor Greene do it, right? She finds a way to pivot to blame Thune and Johnson, but that the president's doing great. He's fantastic because they're so apprehensive to admit that maybe they were wrong about someone, especially someone that they put so much of their faith and stock into as Donald Trump. And so I don't think that we'll, as a Republican Party at least, we'll be able to replicate ever what Trump has done in terms of this unyielding loyalty. So people have mentioned, J.D. Vance could be the next whatever. I don't see that personally. I just don't think that he has even remotely the same charisma and ability to carry Republican voters, but not even just Republican voters, people on the fringe or in somewhere out there in the middle somewhere. I don't think he has enough of a pull to do so. So that being said, I'm sure Trump is hoping that it's one of his sons. I am terrified of that being the case. But again, I just don't think that there is a way to say who would be the next leader of the Republican Party when you still have Trump so looming large. And, he makes these jokes about 2028, and I don't know how much of a joke he thinks that is.
Yeah, it's going to be hard. I mean, we had that same dynamic, with Obama. I mean,
Yeah.
and the Democrats don't like to admit that. It's we have a deep bench and all that stuff. And I said, yeah, but it's hard to replace a once in a generation type figure. And regardless of where you stand on the political spectrum, you have to, these people get into these positions because they have a certain dynamic, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's Trump, whether it's Obama, whether it was Reagan, whether it was Clinton. Now there's some guys that fill in between that, well, just so happened these are our choices, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, those names, when you throw out those names, they invoke memories. Yeah. And so, it's just, I don't know. And my concern from a Democratic side, and this is a selfish thing, is that nobody from my generation is going to be president. I'm a Gen Xer. So Kamala Harris and I are the same age. She's the only Gen Xer I know that's run and had a serious chance to win. And so now with the trend with the Democrats, it's like, well, we got to pick somebody young. And the vice president of the United States is under the age of 45 on the Republican side. I don't see anybody from my generation even getting another shot at it. We had one shot.
Which is really crazy when you think about it. But the baby boomers, such a large, swath of the population. And the fact that the last, we've had 2 octogenarians running, it is really crazy when you think about it. I hadn't thought about the Gen X representation there and the presidency. That's interesting. I hadn't thought about that. And I don't know who we would have on our side too, right? I think we had a couple, Haley, and I know she's laying a bit low at the moment and trying to figure out her next steps, I'm sure. But it's interesting because the Trump factor has been such a hard one for so many people in Republican politics to navigate because either they're terrified of saying anything wrong and then getting in his wrath or isolating voters who voted for him. And I just think there's a way of going about it. You don't have to necessarily like someone to vote for them. But at the same time, you don't have to vote for someone you don't like. And I think that people get so hung up on, what Trump thinks of them versus what do the people who voted for you think of you and what you're doing, what you stand for. I don't have to agree with Trump. I don't have to like Trump. But on some policies, I'll say that I think it's fine. There are some issues that I don't necessarily think that are so bad. I think we can call balls and strikes as they are. It doesn't mean that I support him as a person. Doesn't mean I like him as a person. But I can also say that there are some things that are fine that are going on or that I support. I don't know. I just think that so many politicians have struggled so incredibly to navigate it. And I don't know until he's, out of the political scene, I don't know how they get past it.
Yeah. All right. Last question. If you were assigned to do Black voter outreach in a 2026 campaign, how would you go about that task?
I'd probably study what happened in Alabama in 2017, 2018. I would look through and see broader, broader civic engagement. And I think kind of what we talked about with Mamdani, right? Grassroots efforts, getting a better canvassing, talking to the nonprofit organizations and see how they canvass and how they communicate in terms of not only, encouraging people to vote, getting them signed up to vote, but engaging on, like, in canvassing when you campaign, just for any viewers who aren't familiar, it's not just saying, hi, I'm so-and-so from this group. Who are you voting for in this upcoming election? It's also saying, what issues matter most to you? And what are you most concerned about heading into this next election? But also, what are you worried about right now? And so you can take polls in real time, whether that's through phone calls, text, or door-to-door knocking. Canvassing can be also a really effective tool in terms of just getting to a sense of where people are, but having those communications directly as opposed to email blast, ads on TV, and, making sure they're popping up every other, commercial. That's not necessarily always yes, they're helpful, but are they, really getting to the heart of the issues? Probably not. So I think if I was advising a campaign, I would put more of a focus on what local organizations are doing, talking to church leaders and community leaders, maybe having, different mayoral retreats or dinners, something where you're discussing it on a more local level. Hey, how can we outreach to your community? Where do you see the biggest, roadblocks? Is it polling places that aren't available for early voting? I mean, I know that's an issue across the country, that there are less polling places for early voting. And so if people can't get there, I know in New Jersey we have an election coming up, and so I'm traveling during the actual election. So I'm going to go do early voting. Yes, I have to travel for it, but I think about communities where it's an hour drive to get to your local, that's not feasible if you're going after work or before work or on the weekend. So I think about some of those things too, and talking to local organizers and seeing, okay, what hurdles do we have and how can we address them ahead of not even just 2026, but I think of 28. I think of trying to get ahead of some of these issues now so that you're not scrambling and then running out of time and feeling as though, because I think that was also part of it too. It's hard to compare it with what Kamala went through because she has such a short window of time to even make some of those outreach. But I also think that people really like T-shirts and signs. And so I would put a lot of money into doing a ton of T-shirts and a ton of signs and really making people feel included in part of a campaign. I think that's something too, as is human nature. We want to be included. We want to feel part of something. And it seems small. It seems maybe a little silly, but it's not. It's an easy lift. And for how much money people put into campaigns, make some extra shirts and some signs. It shouldn't be that hard, people. It really shouldn't be that hard. But I think that people want to feel heard, but they also would be included. So those are the things I would focus on.
1983, when Harold Washington ran to become the first Black mayor of Chicago, the Harold Washington for Chicago campaign button was a fashion accessory. You had to have one. If you didn't have one, it's didn't matter. And, of that generation, we had buttons everywhere. We had the blue jackets with buttons. But if you didn't have a Harold Washington for Chicago button, that blue and white button with the city skyline, if you didn't have that.
Oh, yeah.
What are you doing? How come you ain't got a Washington button? And that was the first person I ever voted for. So, that connection, that little simple button, that was a connection. So you're on to something. Look, I got to let you go. How can people reach out to you? How can people follow you? Just give the audience a way that they can connect with you.
Sure. So I post a lot of things on Instagram, and I still have the same account that I had when I first got my account in college. So I haven't changed my name, which is probably something I should have done, but it's at mmgill, Gill on Instagram, and then Maura_Gillespie on Twitter. So follow me there. And yeah, I think that I do a fair amount of TV, but I usually post it on my stories on Instagram. And Blue Tech Strategies is the business that I consult. And so if you're looking for media or PR, feel free to reach out. I'd love to work with you all. And thank you for having me on, Erik. This is a really fruitful conversation. And again, I think what you're doing just shows that the importance of having conversation. And we don't necessarily always have to agree on everything, but just being able to talk through some of these issues and on a broader scale, I think is really helpful. So thank you for inviting me on and for what you're doing.
Well, thank you for accepting I've been pursuing you for a minute, and I'm finally glad that my due diligence paid off, because this was worth it. And the rule is that now that you've been on and you accept the invitation and all that, that you have an open invitation to come back. You don't even have to wait for me to ask you. Just if you say, Erik, I need to talk, we can make that happen. So Maura Gillespie,
I love it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, guys, and we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right, and we are back. And so now it's time for an old friend of the podcast to come on. He has written a new book called The Trial of Donald H. Rumsfeld. And it's a very compelling book, and I encourage y'all to get it. And the author's name is Will Cooper. Will Cooper is an attorney who's done work for major companies, including Google and Samsung. He's also an award-winning journalist whose articles have appeared in hundreds of publications around the world, including the New York Times, San Francisco Chronicle, Chicago Sun-Times, and Jerusalem Post. Publishers Weekly called his writings about Donald Trump a compelling rallying cry for democratic institutions under threat in America. And he is a frequent guest on national television and radio programs and on numerous podcasts. And he lives in sunny California. Ladies and gentlemen, it is always an honor and a privilege to have as a guest on this podcast, Will Cooper. All right. My good friend, Will Cooper, how you doing?
Doing great, Erik. Happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you on. I understand that you sent me this book, The Trial of Donald H. Rumsfeld. So I see that you wrote this, and I want to get into that while I have you. But I do want to do my icebreaker things. And one of those quotes that the quote I'm going to use is from Mr. Rumsfeld himself. He said, "Those who make the decisions with imperfect knowledge will be judged in hindsight by those with considerably more information at their disposal and time for reflection." What does that quote mean to you?
Like lots of things Rumsfeld said, I think it's very insightful and accurate. I think Rumsfeld was really complicated and a mix of positives and negatives, which we can get into. But he was often, not always, but often insightful and accurate. And I think that quote, which a lot of other people have said the same thing, is exactly right. That's exactly right. The things that people are in positions of authority in big, complicated areas are dealing with are much harder in real time than the folks in the peanut gallery who criticize them after the fact are dealing with. I am often one in the peanut gallery being unfair myself, but I think that quote is exactly right.
Well, I've been in the arena and in the gallery, so it's just part of the existence that we go through.
Yes, you're very well suited for that because unlike me, I've only been in the gallery when it comes to politics. You're actually, both sides. I'm curious, if you don't mind, what do you think? Because you've got the right perspective to answer that. Do you agree, or what do you think?
Well, yeah, I agree with that. When you're sitting there trying to make a decision, the one thing that most people don't realize is that the toughest critic of anybody will be, in my case, it'd be myself.
Yeah.
When you look back and some of the votes I've taken on certain things, I'm like, yeah, I probably should have went another way with that. But fortunately for me, it wasn't that many. But I know there was at least a couple that I could really think back and say, yeah, I should have either I should have stuck to my guns or I should have not voted that way. And, so I remember it was, I think after my first year, I got a letter from a lobbyist and the lobbyist was saying that I had voted against a particular bill they were pushing for. And I was like, no. And I had a habit of marking down yes or no on the calendar that the day I voted on it. So I went back and found the calendar for that day, and I said, I guess I did vote against this. Oh, well, I'm sorry, but I understood the reason why I voted against it at the time. But, it just one of those things where, like you said, you're always going to be observed and all that stuff. So
Makes sense.
the other thing is 20 questions. Now, you've been on before, so there's two numbers you can't pick, and that's 11 and 17. So I need you to give me a number other than those two between 1 and 20.
19.
What are some values you think most people share, even if they express them differently?
I think I love the question, and I love talking about what people share this day and age because there's so much focus on what people don't share. I think loyalty to those close to you is something that most people share. And no matter where you are on the political continuum or differences, I think being kind to those in your daily life, even if people don't live up to it all the time, is another example of something that people share. And it's a value and an aspiration that I think most people do share.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. So I'm gonna read something from the book so the listening audience can kind of get an idea of this book. When Rummy's head hit the pillow that night, he thought about the same thing he now thought about every night, September the 11th. The same pain he felt in his stomach when the Pentagon started shaking would come back every night. He saw images of the people being carried on stretchers to ambulances. Their screams echoed in his head. He smelled the dense smoke oozing from the smoldering wreckage. He felt his throat clench as he tried to breathe. In retrospect, everyone now knew the scope of the attacks of that day. But at the time the planes were hitting the buildings, no one knew how vast the destruction would be. No one knew what would happen next. It was horrifying. And the next time could be so much worse, he worried. The potential for destruction was so vast. Americans' way of life depended on 300 million people waking up every day and having the freedom and confidence to participate fully in society. This is what allowed schools to open, markets to function, businesses to create products, services, and jobs, artists and athletes to entertain, researchers to discover new truths, the public square to flourish. People needed to get out of bed each day without fear in order for America to work. The violent dysfunction of the Middle East jeopardized all that, and the asymmetric threats, where just a few people could do so much damage, made the challenge immense. It was his job as Secretary of Defense to defend his country. Never again, he said softly. Already asleep, Joyce moved just a little. Not on my watch. Never again. What made you come up with the concept for this book? Why did you decide to because it's very interesting, and I'm really just curious what was in your mindset to say, yeah, I'm gonna write this book.
Yeah. I think every single person that's seen the book or heard about that has thought that. Why would you write that book? This guy, who is he? Why that book? There's two reasons that I think are the main ones. The first is that when September 11th happened, I was a young adult, and that was very transformative for me. And it's what I went from being pretty ignorant and uninterested in politics to immediately very interested, just wondering how could something like this happen? What's behind this? What's going on here? So it was a very formative period for me in terms of my mental model and how it was, initially started to be formed, and when it came to issues of politics and foreign relations. And Rumsfeld was front and center. He was the Secretary of Defense, focused on this. And I used to watch his press conferences on C-SPAN, which were at the time very widely watched and talked about. And I just found him extremely interesting extremely fascinating as a person, really, really smart, really energetic, not afraid to speak his mind. But then he also made, over time, I realized he made some very big mistakes. His signature action in government was the Iraq War, which was a disaster. And so I always wondered how could somebody so smart make such a, terrible decision? So the first part of your question, Erik, is just, I found him really fascinating in that context. Wasn't just affection, wasn't just hostility. I just found him fascinating. And then the second part was I really wanted to write a book that made the point that people in positions of vast authority are human, just like everyone else. I think it's a very widespread mistake to think of politicians as something other than a normal person, right? When somebody who really hates Dick Cheney thinks about it, they think of him as some dark monster. When somebody who really hates Barack Obama, they think of him as some radical. And that the way they think about politicians and talk about politicians, it's like they're cartoons and not people. But they're all people just like us. And you know this because you were an elected official. Even the biggest, most famous, notorious people in the public square are humans. And I wanted to write a book that showed that this person who was so controversial, such a lightning rod, was a human being and had a human dimension to him that I think a lot of people didn't appreciate.
Yeah. So why did you go through a fictional act as opposed to just doing a straight biography on them?
When you're writing nonfiction, you have to everything you say has to be right. That the goal for me is everything I say needs to be right. It needs to be what I believe. I want to just be completely open and put my views out there and see what happens to them. You want to support everything you say with facts and substance and citations and all of that. I love that process, but it can be challenging. It's a heavy lift sometimes. In fiction, you get to just pick up the pen and go. Wherever your creative juices take you, that's where you go. And so that process at times for me can be easier and more fun. Not always. So I was just kind of in the mood for that. And so I thought that blending the two would be a fun way to write a book and also be a way to make points that to me are important, but not having to have, huge footnotes to support everything I said.
Yeah. Who is more fascinating of the two people that you have written about, Donald Rumsfeld or Donald Trump?
Wow. Well, on the question, there's a lot of other adjectives we could use to describe both of them. On the question of fascinating, I would say Trump's overall impact on the country and the world and all of the things that he's done and all of the ripples in the pond from his two presidencies is, from a position of just fascination, probably as fascinating as anything I can think of in politics. It just would never stop with fascination there. But Trump's a much simpler man than Rumsfeld. Rumsfeld was a lot smarter than Trump. He was a lot more nuanced than Trump. And so I'm going to say Rumsfeld, the man, was more fascinating. Trump, the politician, and his time in office has been more fascinating.
Well, let's dive into that a little more, because you characterize Rumsfeld in the book as a confident, through the narrator of the book. You said you characterize him as a confident but open-minded thinker, unburdened by hubris or ideology. Yeah, just kind of dive into that a little more.
So that description in the book is Rumsfeld's self-image of being a confident, open-minded thinker. And one of the main themes of the book that I believe is very true is people who are very bright, very smart, very capable people in the world, right? With their jobs, interacting with other people, accomplishing big things. When the lens is shifted to themselves and they're thinking about themselves, all of a sudden their judgment collapses. The powerful force of ego and concerns about legacy and how they're viewed and wanting to be the hero who finally did what no one else could do, it can cripple your judgment. So you can do great things in life. And then when questions that you're intertwined with, you can be radically overconfident. You can have a self-assessment that's really inaccurate. I think Elon Musk is a really good example of that in recent history, where he's a brilliant business person. And when he's focused on building a company like Tesla or SpaceX, he's obviously very smart, very capable. When he jumped into politics and was trying to be this hero saving the world from America's overspending and fraud and waste, his IQ dropped in half. I mean, he was constantly saying things that to people like you and I were essentially illiterate about our system of government because it's not his domain. So he was wildly overconfident and made lots of mistakes thinking he knew more than he did. And in the book, Rumsfeld, the same thing. He has this incredibly accomplished life, but then when he tries to be the hero who saves the Middle East and finally solves that problem, he makes big blunders.
Yeah. How much did Rumsfeld's rules shape how you wrote the book?
Well, Rumsfeld's rules is a collection of axioms. It's a mix of Rumsfeld's own statements and quotes from others. There's a lot of really smart and intelligent insights in there. A lot of them are, he's quoting Ben Franklin and Mark Twain and George Washington and people, really smart people, many others too. And then he mixes his own thoughts in there. It's a really fascinating window into who Rumsfeld was and what he thought. So in that sense, it was very helpful. I include Rumsfeld's rules throughout the book, the actual rules themselves. One of the things I wanted to do with the book was actually capture Rumsfeld. So there's a lot of facts and not only about him, but historical facts that are accurate and that actually took place. And so it didn't shape the narrative of the novel, but it informed my understanding of Rumsfeld in a pretty significant way.
Yeah. So let me see how I can answer. So kind of tell the listeners the plot of the book without giving too much away. And then what do you want readers to take away from the book? You kind of answered it earlier, but I dive into a little more. So talk about the plot, and then as somebody that reads this book, what do you want them to get from it?
The first part of the book charts Rumsfeld's rise as a politician. He started in Congress in his 20s and became the youngest and oldest Secretary of Defense. And in the private sector, he was a very successful CEO. So the first third or so of the book introduces us to Rumsfeld and his background. Then the middle part of the book is the Bush administration, September 11th, the Iraq War, and then a big, huge counter history emerges where Rumsfeld becomes president, starts a war with Iran, and there's lots of drama around that, and that gets resolved. There's a constitutional crisis, and the Supreme Court's involved, and so there's a lot of parallels to some of the things we're seeing today. And then the last third of the book is really the trial, which borrows from the first part of the book. So the trial itself, the underlying facts of the trial relate to the Iraq War. And so that last third is the trial, the courtroom scenes, and the resolution of both the trial, of what happens to Rumsfeld and the accusations. And then also everything in the book is told through a narrator who was somebody who knew Rumsfeld well and was a part of these historical events. And so that's revealed and resolved as well. So that's the overall flow of the book. I think from what would I want readers to get out of the book? I mean, there are a couple big themes, but one of them was like I mentioned, that these politicians are humans. And I believe, and you and I have talked about this before, Erik, that as members of society and citizens and participants in the public square, I think it's really good to try to have accurate views. Like, you can vote one way every single time and you can want policies to change in a certain direction. That's great. But your actual inputs into your thinking should be accurate. And if you think Donald Trump is 5'6" when he's really 6'3", that's not helping you. You're not, you're distorting things. And so one of the ways to be accurate about politics is just to remember how human it is, how human Donald Trump is a human. Donald Rumsfeld was a human. Barack Obama. These are human people with all sorts of fallibilities, strengths and weaknesses, just like everyone else. They just happen to have immense power. So that was the main point. And then I also think the probably the second main point was we should all be, and we see this every day in very obvious ways right now, but we should all be on notice of how the ego of these people with power can distort their thinking and cause the policies to be deeply flawed because they're rooted in one's own self-image and ego and desire to be a hero as opposed to rational. I think the best leaders we have separate themselves from the questions of how to solve problems, but that's rare. The norm is to make it all about yourself. And that's why you see things can go really, really wrong, like we saw with the Iraq War.
Yeah. So this is really a good book. And you're getting me into the habit of reading fiction. I think we had this conversation before that I wasn't a big fiction reader outside of the sci-fi genre. And, but
Okay.
you're getting me in a good habit of reading good fiction. So especially if you write it. So I'm really, really proud of the book. I was a little stunned that I got acknowledged in the book because I don't know what I did to inspire that, but I encourage everybody to go get it and we'll talk about that at the end. But every time I get you on, I want to kind of pick your brain a little bit about what's happening. So just on a couple of things, what are your thoughts about the No Kings protests that have happened this year? We saw 5 million folks show up earlier this year. And then just this past weekend, we saw like 7 million people show up. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, real quick, I'll note the acknowledgement. I've said this before. I think you have the best podcast in the world, and I love coming on and being able to talk these things through with you, given the depth of your background and your insights, and that you're unlike so many other people today. You're just trying to get to the root of these problems in a good way. So it really is a part of my creative process, knowing that we're going to be talking about these issues, something that I really value. So thank you for having me on. And that was what was behind that. In terms of the No Kings, I think two things. Number one, Trump's not a king. He's not even close to a king. I think there's a lot of truth to a lot of the criticism of Trump. The notion that he's a dictator, I think is a blunder. We can get into the detail, but I don't think it's true at all. So that's point one. Point two, the depth of the size of the crowd, the momentum of the protests, the emotion behind them is yet another example of how highly charged our polity is and how emotion in so many ways on all sides tends to be dominating reason. And I think that that's an unfortunate, it's always there to some extent. It's a very elevated part of our politics today. And I think that's a real problem.
Yeah. I think when you talk about that he's not a king or a dictator, I think what we're seeing now is probably the most preemptive thing I've ever seen in American politics. I think I agree with you. He has not attained dictator status, or else we wouldn't be having this conversation. there wouldn't be any protest, right? But at the same time, but because there are enough people that have paid attention to history and paid attention to politics and have been able to convince people and show people, hey, this is the trend that we're going. I think people have decided, well, no, we don't want that. And I think that is what has happened. Now, the biggest arguments have been, well, it's just a rally and it's not a sustained protest and all that. So I think that's the thing we need to watch is what comes of these massive demonstrations, right? What kind of sustained protest, what kind of sustained opposition emerges from that? And can we actually stop him from actually becoming a true authoritative dictator? So, I think that's where we are with that. And
I think it's a great, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, go ahead.
I think it's a great point, and I love the use of the biggest preemptive movement. I completely agree. That's a great way to think about that. I hadn't thought about that. See, that's what I'm talking about. I hadn't thought about that before. That's perfect, because that's what it is. One of the reasons why he's never going to be anywhere near a dictator is because of half the country is so against him, and the leadership of that opposition, they're just fiery, preemptive, good, rock solid opponents. And they're just not, they're not going to go down easy or at all. And so I think that's one reason why it's not going to happen. I would also add, I don't think he's anywhere near. So if you think about the literal meaning of a dictatorship, right, it's to dictate government. That's just to distill it down to the essence of what it is. If you think about government in America today, most of the government that gets our attention is the White House. Most of the government that impacts our daily lives, as you know, Erik, state and local. That's where the legal system, for every one Jim Comey federal case that gets all the headlines, there's 1 million state law cases with the local law enforcement, and our schools are run locally. Trump has nothing to do with the overwhelming majority of that. Even at the federal level, the judiciary is exerting its independence every day. If the Democrats are very close to winning the House, if they do, Trump's ability to do anything there is going to plummet to virtually nothing. So I think we've got a megalomaniac in the White House with lots of things to worry about. But the idea that he's going to take over all of these instruments of government, it's good that we're being preemptive. It's part of why it'll never happen. But we're not on the 5-yard line trying to keep him out of the end zone. We're on the other half of the field playing really good defense.
That's a great analogy. We'll leave it at that. Last question real quick. Who do you think is winning the shutdown right now?
Ooh. A Martian looking down on America from outer space would immediately say, wait, Republicans have the presidency, the Congress, both houses, and people are debating who's causing this? That doesn't even make sense. When you actually control all three elements that are required to open, and you have the majorities, and you've been doing things with that majority for months on end, I don't think this should be a debate. And in some ways, it's a signal of how dysfunctional our politics are that this is a debate. This is one of the easiest questions, I think, that have been posed in politics recently. If you have majorities in all three, you own it. Period.
So another guest that's going to be on this particular episode, she stated that there's no clear winners, but there's a definite loser, and that's the American people, by virtue of this dysfunction that you're talking about. You agree with that assessment?
I do. And that's such a common thing. So this dysfunction It's almost like our politics has transcended the notion of winners and losers, because you can quote unquote lose over and over and over again, and then your party sweeps the next election. So it's all the things that matter. The ballot box is ultimately the measure of a win or a loss, and all these interim pronouncements are really phantom victories or phantom defeats. What matters is the ballot box. In terms of the actual consequence of all of this, yeah, the American people, once again, it's the American people, both sides. Think about how many Trump voters have had their lives made worse off by his own policies. But yeah, it's the people, it's the country, it's the people, it's the polity that lose. And it's a shame that the guardians of that are causing it.
Yeah, total agreement with that. So look, I know you got to go. Tell people how they can get this book and how people can reach out to you in the interim.
Thanks, Erik. So the book's easy to find. Amazon's the biggest bookstore in the world by a huge margin. But if you Google the book, you'll find it wherever books are sold, Barnes and Noble, etc. The Trial of Donald H. Rumsfeld. And if you want to learn more about me, my website is will-cooper.com. It's WILL-COOPER.com.
Well, Will, as always, brother, it's good to see you. It's good to talk to you. Keep doing what you're doing, man. And we're going to be doing this for a while, it looks like. So I'm glad that you're on my side. Let me put it that way. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Everything you just said, right back at you. Thank you. Love coming on. And yes, 10 years from now, we'll be sitting just like this on your show, talking about whatever the big things are of the day. And I appreciate that very much.
All right, guys. And we're going to catch y'all on the other side. All right. And we are back. And so I want to thank Dr. C. Nicole Mason, Maura Gillespie, and Will Cooper for coming on the podcast. And I hope you agree with me that they have made this truly a great show. You know, in talking to people that, and I always, some people call it self-deprecation. I just, I'm being honest. It's just really good to talk to people who are really, really smart, even smarter than me, and to pick their brain for the short time that I can get them to talk about what's going on and just kind of give perspective so that you all can hear that. Dr. Mason is a fierce warrior for women's rights, and she uses her talents of research and analysis to fight that fight. And like she said in the interview, she's never shy of attending a good protest. And she said she was at both of the No Kings rallies this year. So, not only is she doing the analytical part, but she's boots on the ground as well. And then to have Maura Gillespie on. Maura is a Republican, but she is of the tradition of the Republicans that I was used to serving with. Somebody you could actually talk to, even if you disagree on something. But her insight, and she's young compared to me. She's very young, but her political maturity is amazing. And her ability to stay focused and calm, whether she's on Fox News or anywhere else, in addressing issues and just being matter of fact about it. It's something I admired, and I'm just finally glad that I was able to get her into the fold and to be a guest on this podcast. And then, of course, Will Cooper. Will is truly not only a good guy, but he's very, very smart. And the way that he can sift through all the craziness and develop rational thoughts, whether he's writing a book or writing a column, to make people that, think about what actually is happening, to really be able to get it where people can understand it. It's an incredible talent. And I am glad that he thinks highly of me. I am humbled that he thinks highly of me. And as long as I'm doing this podcast, Will is going to be a guest. He's pretty much made that clear. But I am really, really proud of him for this book, The Trial of Donald H. Rumsfeld. Didn't see that coming. But when he sent me a copy of it, I was like, oh, yeah, we got to talk about this. So I'm glad we were able to make the time to do that. So, I love all of my guests that come on, but to have these 3 particular guests at this time, it's really, really special. And I'm glad we were able to make that happen. So I want to talk about a couple of things before we leave. One is something I had mentioned in one of the interviews. I think it was with Dr. Mason, when we were talking about the protests and how the election went down, right? And I said something to the effect that people are politically active in the United States more on coincidence than they are on consciousness, right? And the goal of this podcast and others like me are trying to get that reversed, right? Because it's one thing for me to say, hey, the price of my eggs have gone up, right? And then you talk to somebody in another part of the country and they say, yeah, they have gone up. And then united, we say, we need to vote for somebody that's going to do something about it. That's coincidence, right? But where consciousness plays in is that we can decide which person is sincere about doing that and which one is just bullshitting about it, right? And that's where we didn't have any consciousness. We voted on the coincidence that all of us are suffering from the high prices of food. And we didn't put any real thought into who really is going to try to do something about it or who's just giving us lip service, right? And so that's why we had the result we had in 2024. And that's being best case scenario about it. Because a lot of us know there was a lot of other factors that kicked in as to why that man got reelected and that woman did not get elected, right? So we know that there's a lot of historical, sociological stuff that played into what happened. But in best case scenario, let's just say people voted more with coincidence than they did with consciousness. And we've got to get to a point where we want people to vote consciously. Yes, we want people to be woke. We don't want people to be asleep when they go to the polls. We want them to be woke. We want them to be paying attention, right? And so I guess now it's time for another great awakening, this time in American politics, right? Because the first great awakening in American society was based on religion. Now we have to have an awakening in American politics because we see when we don't use our consciousness, we see the results. Now, and that brings me to another point. There are people that are upset because President Trump has decided to renovate the White House and add this giant 90,000 square foot ballroom, right? So in history, different presidents have done things to the house. That house is not the same as it was when it was first built for John Adams, right? It actually has burnt up since then, right? The War of 1812, the British burned the White House. So they had to redo it then, and people were upset when Thomas Jefferson added like not porticos, but he added like extensions, where you could walk from your horse to the White House, not in the rain. People got upset about that because he added that to it. When Harry Truman gutted the White House, right? And he lived in the Blair House across the street. The Republicans were upset about him destroying the White House then. And it's kind of like, bro, we got to modernize the building. The building is literally about to fall upon itself. We got to do some structural work on it. So, people are upset about this image, seeing the East Wing being torn off. You probably will freak out when you see the pictures of the White House in 1948, when it's nothing but a shell of a building, just steel beams holding up the original walls, right? I mean, those things happen. I mean, Jackie Kennedy created the Rose Garden. That was an alteration to the White House. Now, Donald Trump has paved over that. That's, he said people were getting stuck when the grass was wet and all that. And he just didn't want people to have that. I guess folks were complaining about mud on their high price shoes or whatever. So be it. To me, it's about timing and about the allegory more so than the actual him wanting to build his ballroom. Right. I mean, it's all about his pretension anyway. We get that, but just the visual of the White House being damaged is more allegorical as far as his style of governing, right? It's like, that's the picture, If I was consulting a campaign, I would probably say, just like he's tearing up the White House, he's tearing up America, right? So it's all about allegory and timing rather than, because if he was a popular president and he said, I want to have a ballroom, nobody would be upset, right? But because he's a terrible president, he's tearing up the White House, folks are losing their mind, right? I mean, Truman was not a popular president. So even though the White House needed to be refurbished, his political opponents, the Republicans, laid into him. I mean, he wasn't even supposed to be Dewey. You know what I'm saying? There we are. So I think, if people want to be upset about that, so be it. But I'm more upset about the damage he's doing to the actual U.S. government, the damage he's doing to the United States Constitution, the damage that he's doing to institutions, whether they're in Washington or not, such as like wanting to blackball the Southern Poverty Law Center or, go after nonprofits that are trying to feed people. I'm more concerned about that than I am about historical architecture, to be honest, because history has shown that we've gotten a little over emotional about that. But again, it's about timing and allegory. So let's not get tied up in focusing our energy and outrage on that when there's so much more that we could be upset about, right? And I just really think that at some point in time, we are going to have to mature about politics. And I guess that's where this commentary is going. We have to be conscious about who we vote for. We have to be mad about the right things. And we have to do constructive actions to make those changes. I think 7 million people showing up to protest is a constructive thing. I wouldn't have been in the position to be elected if it wasn't for thousands of people in the South that look like me protesting, right? Whether it was a sit-in, a bus boycott, a march, across a bridge, praying in front of a city hall, right? Those things led to positive actions that gave people like me civil and voting rights. And I know what it's going to take for economic rights, but we're going to figure it out because that's what we do, And for those of you all who think that America should be an all white nation, or, the military should be all white, or the NFL should be all white, or the Super Bowl halftime entertainment should be all white. You've got to get off of that bus, because that's not the reality of the world that we live in now. As I stated in my last podcast, this is a global economy. So there's people that's not going to be white making money. There's people that's not even American making billions of American dollars, right? Because that's the way the economy is set up. Countries that technically are not even capitalistic countries trade with us because we're the biggest consumers on the planet, right? So if the economy is global, then your mindset needs to be global. And there's no other country in the world that has a representative from any country, of every country in the world, than the United States. There's no other country like us. There are literally people from every country represented in the United States of America. Everyone. And so you got to think like that. If you're uncomfortable with people that don't look like you being in leadership, get over it. I mean, there's no other way to say it. You just have to get over it and find your niche to make a living or a profit, even in this global economy, in this new world that we're in. Your politics is not going to save you, because the politics is getting as diverse as the actual population itself, right? We've got to get out of that mindset. And then I just want you to imagine if you got what you wanted. Can you imagine a U.S. military with nothing but white men? We would get blown away. We might hold on against Canada. I don't even know if we can hold on against Mexico, right? Let alone Russia or Ukraine decide to turn on us. Heck, I don't even know if we could. We're trying to start a war with Venezuela and Argentina. I don't know if we would do that well against them. It was just all white men, right? So if we can't defend a nation with just all white men, why are we advocating for that? I think, if anything, we should have learned that every American contributes. And if every American is not contributing, then we need to make sure that they are, right? Now, people have their own free will, and if they choose to, say, go into crime or, decide that they want to isolate themselves and become homeless or whatever, can't really do anything about that. But those people that want to do something, that want to do better, which is the overwhelming vast majority of Americans, they want to live in a crime-free neighborhood. They want to be able to make a decent living. They want to be able to go to the school of their choice. Then let's make that happen. Let's stop playing games and say, well, they can't go to this one, or we can't find a way to get people into this job or into this school. That we can't make folks leaders in our military. Just stop. And if you really want to be a meritocracy, then step up your game instead of living off shame, right? Step up your game. Be the best that you can be instead of trying to deny the opportunity for others to be the best they can be. The only way we're going to make it another 250 years is that we stop with the supremacy talk, that we stop with the racism, that we just pick people that we to lead, that understand what America's about, that we seek to elevate every person. The wealthiest nation in the world should not have homeless people. The wealthiest nation in the world should be the healthiest nation in the world, and nobody should have to pay for health care. The wealthiest nation in the world shouldn't have unemployment. The fact that we are, in spite of all that, is amazing. But just imagine how much better we would be if our public policy was dictated toward making sure that those things happened, right? Prioritizing for that. I mean, Elon Musk can make as much money as he wants. If everybody's buying a Tesla, cool. So therefore, we got to have jobs and we got to have incomes where people can afford to pay for a Tesla. And they need to be healthy to drive it, right? They need to have good vision, good reflexes, all that stuff. And you want them to have it for a long time. Again, a health issue. You want them to be smart enough to figure out how to use the car. That's education. You want them to be smart enough to build a car. That's education, right? It's not an incredible ask. It's an incredible commitment. And the United States of America can do it. People like to always use the phrase, I can because I'm an American, right? Then live up to that and stop worrying about who's not the right shade of skin complexion, or if English is their second language, or who they decide that they want to live the rest of their life with, or live the rest of their life being. Get off of that. None of those things are a factor in the person that you look in the mirror every day. Nothing. God made you who you are. It's up to you to make the most of it. And in America, that should be the case. That's all I got. Thank y'all for listening. Until next time.
NBG Podcast Network.